Hey neighbor, welcome back to Beyond AR TV. My name is John, and it's time for another episode of the Dear John Q&A series. This is a show where I take a detailed viewer question that you guys leave in the comments section down below, or DM me on Patreon, as is the case today, and I answer in video form if I feel it makes for a great discussion. Today's topic is Deluxe Edition albums, reissues, bonus tracks, all that good stuff. We're gonna get into details, so if you enjoy this video, please drop a like on it, subscribe for the love of music, and let's get right to the question. Dear John, what do you think of artists releasing deluxe editions so often now? Does it enhance the album listening experience to be given extra songs, or is it just to boost the album's numbers? I was sent that question a while back from a Patreon supporter that wished to remain anonymous, so thank you to them for sending in that question, and it really does leave a lot on the table, because deluxe editions, they're not exactly new, but they've become a lot more prevalent. Drifting into history class mode here for a moment, but starting back in like the 1970s, the 1980s, you could see a lot of successful artists were reissuing their albums with an extra track or two. This was common because maybe it was a sleeper hit of an album and they wanted to add on something else to give it a longer shelf life, or maybe people were just demanding it, and at that time it kind of made sense because you only had the physical formats or what you were hearing on the radio, and if you wanted to own it, well, you couldn't just go stream the bonus tracks on Spotify or Apple Music. Those things wouldn't exist for decades. The 1990s weren't exactly a decade for deluxe editions, and I know that some of you are gonna pull out your card and blow your whistle and say, John, there actually was a deluxe edition of this, and I know that there were some, but it wasn't until the 2000s where we started to get back into that, and we started to see exclusive editions for maybe a physical retailer like Best Buy, or maybe there was an iTunes bonus track. We were starting to see that division more and more often in the 2000s, and I think the most common thing at that point in time was not to reissue an album. It did happen still, but we would get multiple versions day one available for purchase, and that quickly became known as the deluxe edition. The 2010s and now into the 2020s saw the biggest change yet, and we started to see deluxe editions becoming synonymous with day one, of course, but also for a period in time between 2010 and say 2017, I think the whole deluxe edition reissue, it was seen more as like a band thing, not necessarily as a major artist, because they were still dropping deluxe editions day one. Now it's seen as kind of a tool to hold on to and say, hold back a few tracks, because we can do something with that. But for a while, I think a lot of record labels, especially in the rock scene, were very guilty of doing this. Rise Records was something that I set my targets on back in the day because I hated how they would hold on to these deluxe editions from like Of Mice and Men and Paris, and I don't know that they were all on Rise Records, whatever, but they would put the album back out like 1 year later and they would say, oh, and here's all of these other variants that you could purchase, and it seemed like a way for the label and maybe not even so much the artist to make more money. Basically, my stance up until the 2020s was it's totally fine if you want to put something out in partnership with a store. I do feel like it makes some fans miss out and they feel like they have to collect the Target edition, the Best Buy edition, the digital edition, whatever, but it's really not that much of a problem. It's very minor at the end of the day. But the whole thing now is that it's been turned on its head, because instead of putting out something like a deluxe edition day one, they're holding it back and saying, hey, can we put this out next week in order to boost the streaming numbers, maybe stay higher up on the charts for an extra week? Or do we hold on to it for a few months and then, hey, let's extend the life of this album without really adding much to the equation at all? And that unfortunately is hinting at what I want to get to. Deluxe edition songs a lot of times in the modern age, they really add nothing, and at times they kind of sacrifice the quality of the original album. Thinking back to just last year, I know the COVID-19 pandemic has basically changed everything, and at times I can't blame an artist for wanting to extend the life of an album, especially if they have the tracks to do so. But some of these reissues, they are just very plain and obvious in their intentions. MGK, Tickets to My Downfall, released midweek, the same week that the album came out, in order to boost it up and make sure it got #1 on the Billboard 200 albums charts. Just from 2020 alone, there were so many deluxe edition reissues, and most of them didn't add a ton, although there were exceptions that just felt like them tacking on some extra tracks and said, hey, let's boost up those streaming numbers, even though the quality is most often in the shitter. Not always, but again, Lil Uzi Vert, Eternal Atake, that came out like a week after. The Weekend After Hours, I think that was the same case. Morgan Wallen, Dangerous. There's a lot of other stuff we could talk about there, but that was another one that was a big success in terms of chart numbers and used that tactic. Taylor Swift, Folklore, and Evermore, even The Killers with Imploding the Mirage. There's tons of examples, and it's not necessarily limited to one genre, it's just bigger albums or else ones that they want to try and add onto somehow. Whereas in the past, it was basically wait a year, see what happens, if we want to keep touring on this, if we want to give it a longer shelf life, if we just feel like there's something else to be breathed into this era, then let's do it. Now, the deluxe edition, it's being used as a weapon for streaming services. And to a degree, I can understand having to play their game. It's why you see these weird little EP compilations popping up, because an artist will take their old material, they'll try to put it back out there, package it a new way so it looks like a new release so that they fare better in the algorithm. It's a weird time for the artist, but also it gets a little bit scummy to me when you're trying to push off a ton of merch on top of it, or maybe it's just not adding anything, it's just bogging down the project. It happens a lot in hip-hop, although I've been seeing it bleed more into rock too. Examples of a deluxe edition working even better than the original, it does happen, although I can't think of a ton of examples. Neighborhoods by Blink-182 would be one. In fact, I only listened to the deluxe for that one because the extra tracks do add a ton. Don't Panic, It's Longer Now, all-time low, although I do prefer the original version of the album. I just think the deluxe edition, it breaks up the flow a bit, but I do like the extra songs. It's kind of something that I'm torn on, and as I alluded to a moment ago, I feel like it's mainly a hip-hop thing at this point, and they're trying to just boost the numbers. They do so well on streaming. Why not already pad out the track list like your Futures, your Lil Uzi Vert, whoever? You start with 20 songs, you hold over maybe 8, and you slowly release reissues and deluxe editions. It's kind of weird, but now we're seeing rock do it. We see MGK, we see Oliver Tree. There's so many other people putting out deluxe editions. It's kind of maddening because they don't really do anything. Everyone is so desperate to keep the eyes and the ears on them, and they don't know how to do it other than just by sacrificing quality and putting out quantity. And as we all know, that's not a very good mix. It's definitely not a match made in heaven. But again, at the end of the day, this is all just my takeaway from the situation. What do you guys think? Do you care about deluxe edition reissues? Is it a rarity? Is it something that you always check out day one? Or maybe you kind of put it on the back burner and eventually get to it? I am very torn, but overall I would say my feelings are quite negative towards them, especially in the modern age. But to play devil's advocate, I also kind of understand why they exist. Let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment down below. Let me know your perspective on deluxe editions. If you want to submit a question for a future episode of the Dear John Q&A, then I'd love to hear from you. Leave a detailed one down below, starting with Dear John so that I can find it. You can see the last episode of this series by tapping right here, or tap here for another recent video on the channel. Thank you so much for your support in recent weeks. It's been a very tough time, but I'm trying to get back on top of things. Thank you for watching.